You're listening to Content Logistics, a podcast for B2B marketers looking to build a content engine that drives revenue. In each episode, Camille Trent interviews the marketers behind the best content marketing flywheels and uncovers the tactical aspects of content production, from first draft to first customer.
Anthony, thanks for coming on.
Of course, Camille. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're still finding out if we could be friends based on the whole Lakers-Blazers issue there, but at least we can get along on the content topic. So we'll try and keep it cordial, this one. All right, so I'll just
all the respect to Dame Lillard, though. All the respect.
Okay. Well, we can at least agree on that. He's pretty great. All right. Well, LeBron's not bad either. He's okay. All right. So I'll just jump into the problem right now. So as many people know, there are a few problems going on in tech right now, especially B2B software, all of that. And so the questions are always, what should we cut, right? Like what software should we cut and who should we cut? So you made a case the other day for why you shouldn't cut content marketers. And that's probably kind of controversial, right? Sometimes content marketing can be seen as the extra thing, the nice to have thing. Mm-hmm. You see it as a must have thing. So how can content marketers, in a time where there's this return to rigor, there's this, we're cutting everything that we can, we're cutting everything fluffy, and we actually need to continue to hit those numbers, or at least hit what they were hitting last year when times were good, but with less, right? Less budget, less tools, sometimes less people. So how can content marketers help B2B SaaS companies do that in a downturn like this?
Totally. So I think without content, there is no marketing. Like, content is actually the flywheel that makes marketing happen. So I think if you work for a CMO or a CEO that thinks content is fluff, I would strongly encourage you finding another opportunity if possible, because that's just not true. Like, content is fundamentally how we can hit our number as a business. And so if you're kind of typically going through the exercise for cost reduction, it typically goes like this. Like, let's look at everything we can look at before we impact people. And what you'll usually look at is paid media for marketing, because that's the biggest line item on the program budget that typically gets cut. It's the one that's actually the hardest to really prove value of over time, or at least the one where there's a lot of questions. It's the murkier one where, CAC LTV is always, called into question. And then, of course, if you can't cut deep enough there, it turns to, some of the people side, which is super, super hard. And so the perspective that I have is the content, you could effectively strip it all away and keep the content team. And effectively what we're doing is building a message that we want to package into something that people can learn about what we do, or the problems that we solve, or what have you, or the problem in general in the market. You need someone to distribute that content. But those are like the critical few, like the critical things that any marketing team would need just to keep the lights on. So to me, I would have a hard time understanding how a company, and it gets murkier when you think of brand content that might be a bit disconnected from growth, or at least in the traditional sense. But I can't understand the logic behind taking the oxygen out of the marketing flywheel by not investing in organic content.
Yeah, the oxygen analogy is good. It reminds me of, Emily Kramer has a couple analogies around the different parts of a marketing team and the different parts that she views as essential. So she kind of simplifies it into growth, content, product, right? In terms of different segments of marketing. And she puts content and product in the fuel category, using this kind of rocket engine, right? Like if your startup is a rocket ship, right? What do you need to make that rocket ship get to the moon? So you have the fuel and product and content. So we can talk about the differences there. And then there's the engine, which is growth, right? And so if you think about it, growth is largely distribution. We think about paid as a lever there, right? Just being able to sort of use that fuel effectively in a way that makes you go places, right? So you need both. You need both sides of it, but content really is the fuel. Do you agree with that analogy? And how do you see content and product, the similarities and the differences there in terms of it being fuel?
Yeah. Well, I love the analogy, and I think that it makes a lot of sense because you could build like the world's best engine, like an F1 engine, but without gas, or, of course, electric vehicles. Maybe my analogy is breaking down now, but you get what I mean. It's critical, and it's something that, unless we're investing in storytelling and building value with an audience and communicating our product value proposition and these types of things, then like nothing else happens. Imagine a growth team that's just doing pure play paid acquisition. First of all, very expensive, but also, what are you advertising? You're probably advertising a piece of content unless you're sending that traffic just to your homepage, which is going to be pretty bad conversions overall. So I love the analogy. Now, when you say product, do you mean product marketing in
Yeah,
general,
yeah,
or
product
having
marketing
product?
in
Yeah,
this situation. Yeah, these are all
yeah,
part of the marketing team.
yeah. So that's obviously, again, I'm kind of carrying the the flag for content here, but of course, a lot of these other roles, play pretty key kind of parts of this motion. If we're out here talking about best practices and driving all of this engagement and all of this interest with our content and with the sort of broader mission that we're on as a company, but if we can't tie that to a product story, then what are we? I think then we are a media company at the end of the day and not a SaaS business. And so product marketing plays an extremely valuable role to, first of all, like help articulate that story, making sure that at the highest level of the brand and the brand messaging and positioning all the way through, we're sort of setting the stage for our product value proposition. And as we sort of start producing some of that content, whether that's in partnership between content and product marketing or whatever, we can start sort of building a journey for our audience, or we can start kind of talking more about how our products actually make these best practices like optimized or accelerate the adoption of some of these best practices. And so the two, thought leadership and sort of the product value proposition, have to fit together. And so or else we're sort of like ineffective at both.
Yeah, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I feel like the theme for Audience Plus, and then like the theme of what I heard you say is like always the owned versus borrowed, right? So we're
Yeah,
using paid as the example, but that's very broad. Like we're not just talking about Facebook ads. There's like any type of sponsorship of a physical event, of a newsletter, like all of that is borrowed, right? Like you're essentially
yeah,
saying, hey, you have the audience that I want to tap into, that I want to curate, that I want to talk to. So I'm
yeah,
willing to pay you to get this content, which is a lot of the marketing, right? And
right.
it comes from like product marketing strategy too. So that's the fuel, like to get this fuel like out there in a way that's beneficial to our to our rocket ship, right? To keep going back to this
Yeah,
analogy. And so
yeah,
I think there's two parts to this of like moving toward an owned strategy during a downturn being important because you can't afford to burn, right? Like it's not a time like where burn is
oh,
like acceptable. And so you have to
yeah,
kind of like figure out another way to get from point A to point B here. And in often cases like B to like P, right? Like there's usually like these
right,
big
right,
leaps
right.
that companies are looking for. So
Yeah,
so with all of that, I also see like those roles as fluid, and I'm interested in your opinion here of content marketers sometimes like become growth marketers, or like growth marketers kind of like move into content. And so I'm seeing like content professionals being more and more responsible for some of that like organic distribution and the
yeah,
distribution strategy. And when you can do that, then you're saying like, I can build like a workable, machine to like that moves
yeah,
by itself, right? That gives us fuel and that like has a little bit of an engine like to get us going, right? And so,
yeah.
so talk to me about like content marketers and like their role, what you see their role being in distribution.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I think I may not have like a perfect answer, but I think I have like some observations about it. When you thought of traditional growth and some of the rented channels in B2B that we're used to talking about, it's search. You talk about paid as well. These areas where the skill set for the growth marketer is things like, A/B testing, like landing page copy, search marketing from an SEO perspective. So you're maybe not even writing the article, but you're appending the metadata, you're kind of coming up with a strategy, you're, helping kind of sharpen the work that the content team's doing. What else? Just in general, like optimizing around conversions, maybe email, maybe doing some of the marketing ops work too, right? Distributing through the email channel. But the actual rented channels we're talking about are starting to evolve. And so we always talked about social media, for example, as like a community management thing. And it's great. I actually think there's a lot of merit in doing so. But when you think about how consumer media companies conceptualize the marketing funnel, it starts with some of these rented channels like social media, like YouTube, like Spotify. And that's language that in the B2B growth marketing context, we're not really thinking about that. That's like in corporate marketing, what the community manager does. Like that's not really, maybe we do it through the lens of paid, like paid kind of campaigns on LinkedIn or something to that end. But when we start, what I'm imagining is happening is a lot of content creators and folks that might be creators themselves, like outside the context of work, they've figured out how to play to the rented algorithms to build an audience on LinkedIn as yourself, right? You've done such an amazing job of this, as folks have done on TikTok and some of these other channels too. And that's a very different skill set than, SEO marketing or, A/B testing or whatever, digital marketing through that lens. And so I can see that being a reason why a lot of content folks are starting to own more of the distribution side of the equation. It makes a lot of sense. And I think it also speaks to this sort of other trend of companies hiring creators or kind of training up creators. We're probably the worst in the world to actually train them, but finding someone who naturally has this proclivity of creating amazing content, but also knowing how to distribute in some of these more emerging rented channels. That's, I think, a major skill set for B2B kind of marketing teams moving forward.
Yeah, that's really interesting, especially about like social media. Like social media is almost never on the growth team. At least I haven't seen that
Never.
like in an org chart, right? But oftentimes
Yeah.
they are like oftentimes traditionally content marketing would look to social media to be like, you're the distribution channel, like help us distribute this content, like this very long form content too, which is
Yeah.
a way, right? But it's a little it's pretty like black and white. And so we're kind of in this like blended zone where now like brand marketers and social media marketers are now expected to or have the additional responsibility of like, hey, understand what's going on in like this creator landscape, right? And like how
Yeah.
we can put more fuel like on our distribution and to get more reach, right? Of some of
Yeah.
this content and even help create the content, right? Like creators
Yeah.
are called creators for a reason. They help you like
Right.
create the content too and
Yeah.
also
Crazy stuff.
distribute it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think like more is being put on there. And I think the other side that again lends itself pretty well to what you guys are doing is I see media strategy and like media style content as another way to help like distribute content. So if you're more of like a pure content writer, content marketer, and you're focused on just making something that people want to read, right? Like, and making like some sort of like serial content,
Yeah.
it naturally kind of like builds an audience. Like, even if your distribution skills or growth skills are
Yeah.
low, like, if you're not traditionally like a growth marketer, you can
Yeah.
build something that's like really valuable to people and like put it out there and like start growing something organically and something owned that way that, yeah, that's really like mostly the content marketing team working on that.
Yeah.
And so this kind of lends itself to this next question of what do you consider like a recession proof content marketing strategy, right? Like essentially this is how
Yeah.
has content marketing evolved and what type of content marketing? We touched on a bunch of things like social media, SEO, uh, media style content. Like what type of content like do you recommend
Yeah.
marketers lean into in 2023 and
Yeah.
beyond?
Totally. Well, you hit on a lot there, right? The formats are evolving. The way consumers are actually engaging with information and content online is changing. And so all of these things are sort of happening around us as well as the recession, right? That's kind of it really helped reframing some of the priorities for some of this stuff. Look, I think performance oriented content, when I say that, I mean SEO articles or whatever, they're table stakes. Like we have to do it, but it takes forever. It takes a long time to start seeing the value in organic traffic and all these types of things. And I think the other element to just time, which is something that's just really hard for us to prioritize in 2023 when we've got to hit the number now, is that we're writing that content for an algorithm. We're not writing it for a human. And when we write it for an algorithm, it's, we've mastered the science of doing some of this as an industry over the years, but it's also getting more competitive to rank, on, the front page of Google or whatever. So it's getting harder and we're getting better, which is making it even harder. And also it takes time. And so what I found is investing in writing or creating videos or creating podcasts like this for humans instead of for an algorithm, where we're actually focused on delivering value and having a conversation. Again, when people might be listening to this thinking about, all right, how do I prioritize content marketing? And they might have gotten an insight from our conversation. Like that's actually building relationship with someone in the audience. And our time here, our 1 hour we've scheduled, has an outsized impact on being able to scale that relationship building exercise. And that is extremely powerful. And you mentioned Audience Plus, we've been creating content for about 3 months now at the time of this recording. And we've built an owned audience of almost 1,200 subscribers, of folks that are wanting to hear more content from us. They're not, you know, hand raisers to buy a product. Thankfully, we don't even have a product yet, but they're saying that we care about this topic and we want to be educated and entertained and inspired by the stuff that you guys are producing. And so that's 3 months, right, of content production distributed in rented channels, but then pushing people towards a series of content that's exclusive for subscribers and running that flywheel. I think that one, you're able to build more affinity between your brand and the audience. Two, you're able to actually build a subscriber data set a lot faster than just relying on performance content. And in general, by the way, the web conversions are much better. And so average SaaS company is something like 1.1%, I think is what I saw for the benchmark for getting people into a get started or talk to sales kind of call to action and workflow. And media companies that are employing the strategy that I'm talking about are seeing something like a 10% conversion rate. And so it's better for business and it's the right thing to do by means of building an audience and engaging a community. So that's where I would really be thoughtful. And, I'm not saying throw away all the table stakes kind of SEO content. That stuff's important to invest in over time, but it's this editorial content. It's short form videos in these rented channels that are leading people into more of a kind of longer form relationship. That's, I think, what by the way, costs like very little to produce in the scheme of things. And you're able to get outsized returns for that effort.
Yeah, there are like two things that really stood out there. So in some of the traditional content marketing, which as you said is table stakes, should do it, helps you cover your bases and helps with just like capturing some of that demand that might already exist. But like the more competition there is, like the more people doing it, and now more people know to do it, right? The more
Yeah.
competition there is, and also like the more, I think you mentioned like scientific, but like formulaic also comes to mind. Like
Yeah.
the more that we're able to kind of hack the algorithm, the longer that it's around, the more able we
Yeah.
are to do that, the less effective it is, right? Because
Right.
it just becomes like Mad Libs, right? You're just plugging
Right.
and playing to some degree. And I'm
Totally.
oversimplifying it. Like this is like a very technical and very hard skill. And I think at this point, people who can do SEO well in a way that actually drives revenue and actually provide like results is a very high level of difficulty because of this. It's very
Yeah.
competitive.
Totally.
But like that's just something to consider. If this happens to all marketing tactics, that happens to all sales tactics. That was the other thing I was thinking of, is like how formulaic and like pattern recognition things get. Like when people are using the same templates, right? Like exactly
Yeah.
like what the outreach is going to look like, and it just, you don't
Totally.
read it. You just glaze over it. You just like, you recognize that it's spam. Essentially becomes
Right.
less effective. So that's the case with everything. And what you're sort of proposing is like creating those relationships and more intimately, more not one-on-one. You can still use social media as you guys do to kind of like build that audience. But I think like what you guys have done well, and what I've seen other companies that are now like succeeding do well early on, was focus really, right? We're not so much worried about just getting bodies, right? Like getting emails, right? Like
Yeah.
that's not the objective. More so than that, like audience, like building some sort of audience. And then even
Yeah.
like a level above that, I would say like community, like building the right community of people and focusing the
Yeah.
content that is gonna turn some people off. Like it's not gonna interest people,
Totally.
and being okay with that, saying like, I'm okay with building a smaller audience that's more relevant to my
Yeah.
software business and the things that we do well.
Your content should turn people off. Otherwise, it's not as, disruptive. And I'd say for the folks that do get it, it's not as potentially value added, right? In the sense that, we start to, it's so funny. Like, I've been talking about this now for about 3 months. The company's about 10 months old, but we really latched on this idea of every company is becoming a media company. And as we've been like just sheer brute force, like content marketing over the last, or releasing content over the last 3 months, we've had so many folks that are like, every company is not becoming a media company, or I've heard this before, or this is tired, or here we go again. And I'm like, great, that is awesome, because we are helping kind of stoke conversation around this. And we have a lot of conviction behind, why this is actually super important. But it's, unless you're sort of sparking some of that debate, I think there's a chance that your message comes out a little lukewarm. So I would say feel free to be a little, not controversial, but to have an opinion and being bold about kind of sharing that opinion.
Yeah, like you always need to say something more times than you think, right? I feel like that's like
Yeah.
the
Oh, yeah.
number one, like, I don't know, takeaway from like marketing is it
Right.
just how many touch points it takes, like just to get people like recognizing your name or like
For sure.
considering you as like legitimate, is you have to feel like a crazy person to some degree because you've
Yes.
been saying it
You
just
absolutely
over
have
and
to.
over and over again. And
Totally.
so along those lines, like, do you think of it as a blend? So I'll give an example of, broad reach and like that narrow reach of content, right? So for instance,
Mhm.
at Pure Signal and Key Play, like, are oftentimes like we're talking to GTM leaders, right? So sales or
Mhm.
marketing leaders, and trying to have our content like hit that bar every time. But like our audience, like for Pure Signal, like more of the media side, is larger than that. Like it's
Mhm.
anyone in B2B SaaS, like marketing and sales, right? So there are some pieces that have that broad appeal. So for instance, like they're just helpful resources for that community. So it might be something like,
Yeah.
finding sales and marketing jobs and roles, and, helping people just in their work, like get ahead.
Yeah.
And so there's that, there's like the broad appeal stuff. And then most of it though, like the analysis, like the data and the research that we do, like we try and have it always stack up to that, VP sales or marketing kind of like level. So
Yeah.
how do you think of like the blends that you might need to get, to get reach, but also reaching the right people?
Yeah. Well, I think it might be a little stage dependent too. If you're like where we are right now, it's just like we want everyone in the world to hear this, right? And just
Right.
like let's just make as much noise as possible. To your point, be repetitive and on message, and spark kind of a conversation at scale. I think even if you're kind of a mid to late stage company, there's benefit to that. It might get a little closer to brand than it would kind of demand and revenue marketing, but there might be folks that are potential partners or somewhere in your ecosystem, that are not your target buyer of your software, but they're kind of believing in the bigger trend, and you kind of become the center of gravity for that discussion. So I definitely think there's value to having a strategy that casts a wider net and evangelizes an idea that goes far beyond the products that you sell. But that only works if you then have a very targeted set of content franchises, or however you want to refer to it, that's targeting your buyer, and being explicit about, hey, as a brand, like we are the patron saint for that buyer. Like, we love all this stuff. We're talking about all these things, and how this, VP in a go-to-market role is, how they're kind of the next kind of CEO, or, being a champion of that persona, but equipping them with the tools through your content from a best practice perspective, of course, with your product as well, to actually do their job is critical. One thing that's interesting too is where if you're sort of selling to, let's say, sales leaders, how do we go up and down the sales org chart from a content perspective to ensure that some of the buying committee is brought in, so not even just in sales, but even folks that will help influence that deal. I think the masterclass has to be Gong for that, where they've effectively built a tool that listens in on sales conversations like that with AEs, and those conversations are used for training, and they could potentially get promoted through them. They could potentially get coached, or even fired as a result of some of that content. And so what are some of those conversations? So they built their community initially with AEs, they became relevant to the field and created sort of this trust at scale through their content marketing, through their events, their community with individual reps. And so as they went up market and sold revenue intelligence to VPs of sales and CROs and that sort of thing, the sort of folks that were on the other side of those conversations felt the sense of comfort and trust with the Gong brand that, oh, these are going to be used to help me become a better rep. And that, I think we have to give a lot of credit to the content marketing and the community audience engagement work that helped kind of pave the way for that sale to happen. So anyway, I think that you can't sort of do the big brand content without being focused as well. But I think there's this sort of accelerant that happens if you can do both of them sort of in concert or just in a way that's strategic.
Yeah, I mean, B2B is more complex because you are selling to more people, right? Like, even
Yeah.
if you're not, even if they're not the decision maker, like they, that meaning the end users, like, do have a say,
Mm-hmm.
right? And they can definitely influence the purchase, right? So,
Oh yeah.
so especially if the end user is like, an AE in the situation or a BDR, like they have to like using the product, and typically, like even before that, they have to like the brand or like the idea,
Yeah.
behind the product, or be bought into, the movement basically. And
Yeah.
so I think that's a good example for that reason.
As, as would a peer executive, like let's say marketing has a seat at the table for that buying decision, as with the CEO, perhaps that is the ultimate sign off, especially in 2023. We'll probably see a lot more of that, as are the implementation partners or the channel partners that are listening as well. So I definitely think there's sort of a set of concentric circles here of people that we'd want to influence with content, but sort of keeping the focus on the page, on the sort of persona that we're after, but then building out from that, I think is a pretty wise strategy.
Yeah, yeah. So I think too of like all of the challenges, I think, with 2023, and with basically like trying to hit shorter term goals and longer term goals. Like, what are some ways that content marketing can help do both? I think especially for teams who are maybe wanting to build more of an owned audience or more of like a media strategy, but also are just really worried about, hitting their goals and like having a job in a
Yeah.
year. How can
Oh yeah.
content help do both? And maybe what types of content are best suited to do that?
Yeah. I'd say a couple of things. My view on this is changing too. We did this conversation with Joe Chernov, who's the CMO at Pendo, and he had talked about, when you're a new marketer coming into a role, let's say a head of marketing or something in 2023, you have to do two things. You have to look at what's not working and immediately stop doing them, but you also have to make a bigger bet, because you can't just go in and try to move the dials like this. You have to be able to make a bet on something that has the potential to have an outsized outcome for the company. So what I would say, if we think about that through the lens of like tactical content marketing to help achieve goals for this year, and then sort of the big bet on the tactical side, one of the conversations around 2023 is a lot of focus on retention, a lot of focus on making your existing customers successful, helping drive renewals, potentially even upsells if possible, but focusing in on that renewal seems to be where a lot of the momentum is. It's not to say we're not focused on closing new business, but it's just like a slower, growth rate kind of projected for most companies this year. They're sort of keeping plan in a more conservative kind of range. So thinking about your content as a way of how can you express like making folks more productive with your products, and so that's product education type of content, or just thinking about what are people at the customer thinking about. They're going through the same stuff we're going through. They have their own kind of issues where it comes to churn and fear for their role, and budgets being reduced and all these things. So creating content that's helping build relationship with our existing customers and helping sort of be with them through this kind of season of their careers and kind of their companies, I think is a wise place to invest from a content perspective, to see at least that a more clear tie to value than saying we're not going to do any of that. Let's just go and start burning through our keyword list for a search. That feels like a better use of time. But then more broadly, and maybe bringing that same sort of human kind of approach forward is starting to like being very thoughtful about saying we need to start building our own audience if we're not doing that today, or doubling down on our own audience, or engaging our own audience with content and media and some of these new things. It's a big bet, but it's also not from a cost perspective specifically, meaning you're not, I don't think you have to risk it all from a budget perspective to start doing this, to start really kind of understanding what is and isn't working. But you will be happier turning the corner out of whatever is coming here from this economy, be it a recession or whatever, knowing that you have built an engaged audience of people who care about the topics that you're talking about. This is future pipeline. This is kind of short, even potentially on the short term. And you're doing so by exchanging real value that's helping them in their roles today, in the economic uncertainties of today. And you're delivering that in mediums that is inspiring them and educating them and entertaining them. And so I think that we can't forget that there will be an end date to this season of our economy, hopefully, right? Like it's got to be. And in that world, you don't want to be stuck saying we sort of, ran marketing to the ground and froze everything. And now we have to start turning on the engine again. So that's how I would see the two. And again, as we said with the opening question, content is at the heart of that. Content is at the heart of being able to both play defense and offense in 2023.
Yeah, so I think what I got from that, or a big takeaway, is marketing. A lot of marketing should be long term, right? Like sales is closing deals now. Like it's just naturally more short term. In some high ACV like environments, it's going to be longer term sales and things, or longer term sales cycles. But marketing like should, at least part of your marketing department like should have a bigger bet, and should have like the 10x idea, or a few ideas that have the potential of 10x, knowing that most of them like won't actually reach that potential, but when one does, like that's why you do it, right? It's ultimately it's a series. It's kind of a series of bets, right? Well educated bets, but you can't not do it.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how long term the impact is. Honestly, it's tough to say. Like we hit everyone in our subscriber base of 3 months with a demo. Like, would we get 100 demos out of it? I'm not sure. I'm not willing to take that risk right now. But I think the bigger thing is sales is all about relationships, right? And so if we reframe what marketing is doing as saying we're going to build a relationship at scale through our content in this season, it's a big bet, but it's kind of, to your point, built on a little bit of an educated guess here of saying, okay, well, if marketing can build a relationship at scale in an efficient way, then as we start kind of looking to commercialize and sell, and grow kind of our, pipeline or whatever, grow our revenue, that cohort of leads will probably be have a much higher conversion than just putting that money into AdWords and hoping for the best. And that's what we've done. That's what we've done for generations in digital marketing. It's been like just betting on paid, and it felt predictable. We talk about an engine and all that, but let's go back to basics. Like, these are people who have a problem to solve. Our products help them solve that problem. Our content helps them solve that problem. A community that fosters belonging helps them solve that problem. And if we can do that at scale, I think that's going to actually be a big bet, but kind of a safer bet than some of the decisions we've made so far.
Yeah, and you brought up like just helping people in general is a theme like that come up, right? And the belief in like that karma that sort of comes from that. And I think right now, like marketing and sales, especially in B2B SaaS, is getting hit pretty hard, right? Like it's almost totally. Like never. In some ways, I think it's still like a great time for marketing and sales, but it's also like it's been a while since it's been this uncertain, right? And so I think when you, at this time, like when everybody wants to kind of retreat and like fend for themselves and sort of like defend, and help close like their own deals, like the more, especially you and I are both like in selling to marketers, right? Or in my case, like marketers and sales, the more you can just say, how can I help other people right now? Like that are going through that same thing, or how can I help like, my community, my audience, like thrive during this time? And there's two benefits that I've seen just in what we do is like, I better learn go-to-market strategies, right? Like how to be a better marketer myself by studying it and then sharing that like with the community, right?
Yeah.
So you're naturally learning around, and there's no downside to sharing what you're learning along the way, right? The
Yep.
building and public side of things. And so
Yep.
there's that. And then there's the real thing of, I think, especially this so it sounds so cliche, but in times like these, like
Yeah. Totally.
you're like, you remember that, right? Like I think about like the hardest times in my career or in my life when someone just like steps up, right? And
Yeah.
like is there for you then. Like it still applies to B2B because ultimately you're selling
Totally.
to people, right? And so like you
Yeah.
remember, oh, that company or that content like really helped me in my career.
Yeah.
And so there's like naturally more respect and credibility there. So any thoughts
Yeah.
around that?
Well, it's one of those rare moments, I think, where like doing the right thing and helping people is now aligned to commercial like success as well, right? Where, we're not growing at the cost of, whatever, like we're actually growing by serving. And that's a very powerful idea. And, sometimes in B2B, we're like, all right, we're not, curing, infectious disease, we're not saving the world, but I think moments like this help add a lot of, meaning and fulfillment behind our work.
Yeah, yeah, that's well said. It's funny because my husband like did study infectious disease. He like I joke a
Did
lot about how he does the important work, and
Yeah.
I'm just marketing. But it is really nice like when that can happen, right? And when you
Yeah.
do weirdly like when you do focus on just helping other people get better. In this case, like at their job is really like our sphere, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, that you feel better about it, they feel better about it, and it also somehow like helps your bottom line too. So, all right,
Totally.
quick like logistics on this as we kind of wrap up of where to start, right? So I think there's two scenarios here of you're starting in 2023, right? Like, and that's very
Yeah.
different than starting in like 2020. So yeah, so you can kind of go through the two different scenarios if you want. I think the main thing though is like assuming you're kind of starting from scratch right now and you have a
Mhm.
small budget, there's an emphasis on, retention, limited kind of runway to show that content is worthwhile.
Yeah.
Where would you recommend content marketers or marketing teams start?
Yeah. I think that I'd say two things. First, use resources like Peer Signal and others to like understand your audience, understand who are they, where are they, like what are the problems that they're sort of facing, like study the data, but also study the context of kind of what they're going through in this kind of season of our industry. And, don't make assumptions on it, like use real data and context that is out there. And when you have that, this is borrowing advice from Patrick Campbell at former Profit Well, now Paddle, but like start with something. Start with one concept, one show. It doesn't have to be a 200K agency agreement to like launch a chef's table for your industry. Like do something that you can start getting feedback on. Produce a show that is serving that unmet need from your market, that is relevant. It's delivered in a format that is perhaps engaging to help you kind of cut through the noise a little bit. And by doing so, to kind of everything we've talked about, two things happen. You're able to build a relationship at scale, whether that's coming from your CEO or your whoever's the spokesperson for your company, like being kind of the being able to scale their impact and their influence through that medium. And you're going to be building an audience, and you're going to be able to leverage other kind of programming to convert that audience into an owned audience, which is going to be how we sort of accelerate overall moving forward out of here. So I said a lot, but I'd say to summarize, know your audience and get to know them, and then have one content franchise, one hypothesis of something that you want to do, and start doing it and learn.
Nice, nice. Okay, you kind of answered the second question too, but I'll ask
Oh,
any.
oops.
Oh, no, you're good. But I'll ask it anyways because it's a little different. So,
Yeah.
a minimum cadence kind of that you need for a content program. So
Ooh.
you talked to this a little bit. Of it sounds like you're thinking in terms of serial content, in terms of a show, right? So when you're saying like a one-off or just starting with one thing, you're not talking about one
Yeah.
task. You're talking about one program. So talk to
Yeah.
that a little bit, like maybe assuming one marketer, right? Like you're just getting started. Like
Yeah.
what's a cadence you need to just build some momentum?
Yeah. So I don't think it has to be insane. So maybe I would say like set something that's realistic. Just make sure to hit it. So if that's one newsletter a month, great. Start there, right? Start by producing the best newsletter you can once a month and distribute it. Over time, start layering on more, formats, more franchises, whatever. But I think cadence is really important because you're building this kind of like expectation with your audience that, hey, this is a brand that is investing in creating this topic. They see me, but they're not going to like disappear tomorrow. Like they're still in the business of serving this unmet need. So I think I would prioritize cadence over production quality any day of the week. So don't let the quality bit hold you back, but just come up with something reasonable to start with and just make sure you hit it, whether that's a monthly something or weekly or or more.
Nice. Okay, I think you hit on that pretty well. So I'll just roll on to community. So what part does like community play in all of this, and how can it help you either fuel the content, or how can content help fuel community? Just kind of talk to that relationship.
Yeah. It's so funny. I like the difference between audience and community is apparently like a religious battle. If you ask somebody like, what is an audience? What is community? Where does it end? So I think that the HubSpot, Dharmesh was on stage talking about the future of marketing is community led. And I deeply believe it. I don't think he was talking about the sort of little c community, which is effectively your customers, folks that are buyers of your product, users of your product. I think he was referring to what I call like a capital C community, which is people in your audience who care and are engaged with the topics that you're talking about, and building connection with that audience, and then using that connection, that acquiring customers in that relational kind of way to grow your company moving forward. And so I think community through that lens is literally, it's the end by which this whole media company thing is the means. And so content, it's how we get there. Like without investing in content to build that connection, to scale that relationship, it just doesn't happen. There's no other way, unless you were able to like clone your CEO and get them to go out and knock on the doors of every potential member of your audience and then build a relationship. That's like the only other way. So everything short of cloning, I think content is going to be the way we sort of get to this community-led growth chapter of our industry.
Nice. Okay, cool. The last thing that I like to ask is resources. So assuming pretty limited budget, pretty limited like resources, any like sort of low budget suggestions? I know you've talked to kind of like being able to set up a media studio kind of on a budget.
Yeah.
So any resources you'd recommend for setting up a recession-proof content strategy on a budget?
Yeah. So I would say on the content creation production side, I'm here on basically a SLR camera and a connection to my laptop. I don't have the light up. I probably should, but we're effectively at $1,000 for this. Is it Netflix chef's table? No, but I think pretty, improved than the company webinar or company or laptop webcam. The other option for companies is to build a studio. So build a little studio in your office if you have an office. We spent something like $15,000 on like Blackmagic cameras, teleprompters, lighting, like slider, like the whole nine. And 15K is nothing compared to the 200K for 6 episodes quote we got for our agency that we had reached out to, which is more going rate, if you want that sort of Netflix quality. And so we make the 15K investment up front. We can now produce an infinite amount of content as flexibly and as often as we want, and we do. So I think there is, on the creation side, also some software that helps with all of this, whether it's StreamYard for streaming. We're on Riverside right now for remote production, Canva and Descript. There's all of these tools that help you kind of process that content too, for video or podcast specifically as you create it. So I think that's the tools are getting cheaper, and the production quality with these cheaper tools is getting better. And so that's, I think, where I would kind of focus. On the distribution side, there's a company called AudiencePlus. We'll talk about that, I guess, in a few months. But, we're building some software to help on the distribution side that we're really excited about, specifically through the lens of how can you actually engage folks in these rented channels, but then build this owned audience. And so I think that's where there's been a little bit less innovation, where a lot has been happening on the creation side, but maybe not enough on the distribution. But to give you a fair answer, I would say think about the rented channels like LinkedIn, like Twitter, like YouTube as a playground by which we can actually learn those algorithms now, figure out what's actually getting the organic reach, what are we saying in the post or what are we saying in the video that is actually like limiting our reach as a brand, because those tactics or that learning is really going to help us be more impactful as you launch your media programs in those channels, and by which reach more people and hopefully have the ability to convert them into owned members of your audience moving forward.
Yeah, and not to mention that organic social media is free, so it's pretty
And
good
it's
playground
free.
right now.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right, sweet. So advice, and this would be Fred, advice for content marketers who would like to keep their jobs or even potentially get better jobs, and marketing teams that are looking to like thrive with content in this climate.
Yeah. I mean, I think the big lesson here to consider is just how are we evolving from performance content marketers to more editorial? How are we having those discussions with our demand leaders that are staring down a pipeline target in most cases? If you're on the brand side, it might be an easier conversation, but there might potentially be even less kind of budget or flexibility to do some of these things. So I think figure out sort of a lot of what we talked about today in terms of how do we think about this editorial content as a function of driving growth, not as a distraction, not as this brand exercise that is disconnected from the funnel. Like, be able to tell that story to your teams and to your leaders. And I think that that's going to be the biggest kind of shift moving forward to kind of, help make your role even more impactful within the company, or go find a CMO that does, or find, someone who is investing in this stuff. I think people, their eyes are opening to this kind of new way of going to market. And so, definitely work somewhere that you feel has a similar philosophy to the way that you kind of see content playing a role in marketing.
Yeah, nice. I like that. First, identifying whether or not content is going to work at the company, even if you believe in it, you have to have buy-in, right? So understanding if
That's
that
right.
exists or not, and then and then looking at like how you can execute from there once you're in the right spot. So Anthony,
Totally.
where can people find you?
Yeah, best place is actually go to audienceplus.com and subscribe for free. We're sending a weekly newsletter out based on what we're learning, kind of building in public. We have exclusive CMO conversations once a month where you can ask your questions to a CMO. It's literally just unscripted, everything's unfiltered. And then I do some writing on LinkedIn as well. But yeah, would love, if this resonates with folks, to check us out and kind of help contribute your voice to the conversation too.
Awesome. Well, thanks for coming on, and it'll be fun to see our teams battle it out for like the 12th seed at this point. That'll be a good
Right.
time.
Well, I know. What a year.
What a year. All right. Talk soon, Anthony.
Awesome. Thanks, Camille.
Thanks for listening to Content Logistics. This episode was produced by Motion, a done-for-you B2B podcasting agency for busy marketers. If you liked what you heard, please follow the show on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.